Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to the Erudition Network Interactive Black History and Knowledge Session. My name is Eddie Phillips. I am the host of this Black History session every Thursday, where we come on and we discuss things in concerning of Black history. And predominantly, we try to talk about things that maybe you haven't learned in school or maybe hasn't been provided to you in general. Over the years, or for our young people, what they're not getting in school. So every Thursday I come on and spend about an hour talking to you out there about our history. I love it. I think it's something that we have to do. As you know, we're approaching Black History Month. But here's the thing. I often tell people I teach Black history all throughout the year, and I do. Every Thursday I'm on. Sometimes some special episodes that I will do to get on and discuss things about Black history. And that runs the full gamut, because Black history is world history. It is our history. Whether you're white, black, yellow, brown, it doesn't matter. It is the history of this world, and it is something that we should invest in, and we should take the time in learning. As you can see on the political side of everything, that many people don't want us to talk about this history. They don't want us to talk about what's going on or what has happened to Black people throughout time. And so we spend so much of our time here trying very hard to give that its due diligence and to talk to you about Black history. And I appreciate everybody who joins us and gets on. And even if you don't ask any questions during the session, I am still grateful that you're here. I see 2 people are in here. Sean Anthony, good to see you. Thank you for joining us as my son. I'm happy that you're here. So Michelle, thank you so much for joining us. I'm happy that you're here as we discuss something tonight. We're going to discuss something tonight. One of the things that is so heartbreaking is that we, throughout this country right now, we're seeing an attack, a racial attack. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it for anybody. I saw a story earlier today where a young Black kid was being harassed going to school in Alabama. And people say, oh, well, it's Alabama. Doesn't matter where it is. Today, in this era, he's going to school, an African-American child or Black child, however you tend to term yourself. And the white kids, particularly one that are in his class, were calling him names, talking about his dark skin, calling him a monkey. And it had gotten to such a point where he initially tried to ignore it. He tried to ignore it. And then he broke down. He came home and he broke down and told his mother that this was a daily thing and that he was being harassed by white children in his class, particularly one young man. And I want to bring this up because I want us to understand that there are many of us, and it's not because we're bad parents, bad grandparents, or anything wrong with us. We have our kids to go to school every day. We drop them off in the brick and mortar schools. And as they go to these schools, if I posted earlier this week, I think on my Facebook page, are you asking your child about school, about what they're learning in school, about what is being taught to them, how it is being taught to them? Are you engaging them? Because right now in this country, we have people who, particularly in Florida, who are trying to stop the learning of Black history. I can't make that any more plain. They don't want you to teach history that is irregular. In other words, they have become comfortable with teaching a revisionist history, teaching ideas that are not true history. And the counter argument to this is lacking. I'm going to say it very clearly. It's lacking. Because we have many historians out here and getting in umbrage, getting angry, and talking about how this is detestable and Ron DeSantis is evil and whatever you want to say about the government or whoever this is. That's one thing. But what are you doing to address it? What are you doing to help your children have a better understanding of who they are? Because if the school is investing its time and its effort to not let them know who they are, how are you countering that? You can't just counter it with umbrage. You can't just counter it with being angry and saying, oh, this is just detestable, this is horrible. You have to put the work in. You have to teach. You have to give time. You have to give the equal amount of time. And it doesn't have to be a long time. Take an hour. I do it with my sons. Take an hour to talk about your family history as African Americans. Don't hide. I speak with my dad a lot. And my father says, a lot of the older people, they didn't want to talk about history. And I understand pain. I understand. But people who don't know who they are, have nothing to really fall back on when someone asks them a hard question or gives a phone answer. We have to do better with that. We have to be wise with that. So I spend a lot of my time here and on other programs, when I can get on other programs, talking about our history. And I do that for a major reason, because we got to get better. We got to get better. So, Pastor Sarn, I see you in there. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I feel sometimes as if I go through this and I don't know if people really don't understand how serious it is getting. Several years ago, I had the vision to do this. I had the vision to do this, given to me by God. And I say that, given to me by God. Said, Eddie, I let you go through all of these things so that you can teach, so that you can inform, so that you can help people understand how things happened, how we got to where we are. And a lot of times, as I'm going through lessons and as I'm going through and I'm teaching people, I get disheartened until it's always funny. Someone tells me or sends me something and they say, man, don't stop what you're doing, because what you're doing right here is changing the ideas. And I know that ain't nothing but God, because I sit here a lot of times going, man, are they getting it? Are they getting it? I spoke last week that my grandmother passed away, and they're getting ready to have her funeral in Chicago. And it made me think about the Kiswahili terms that I learned several years ago, right? The Sasha and the Zumani. And I will say those again, the Sasha and the Zumani. Because those terms, and I think I spoke a little bit about it last week, but those terms are important terms for us as Black people to remember our ancestors and remember who we are. If you don't remember, I think I put it in one of my quizzes infamous quizzes that I put out. The Sasha are people who are known by someone who is still alive. My grandmother is still in the Sasha. She has grandchildren, and we all remember times sitting with her, talking to her, getting firsthand knowledge from her. You all have people in your family, your uncles, your aunties, your cousins, your grandparents who are still around, who you have an interaction with and you can learn from. And you can get the information of what came before that and from their experience and who they interacted with. The Sasha is finite. It does not last forever. And it is something we must cherish. It is a Zulu term. And it simply means to give reverence to the fact of those who came before us, who were just with us before they go on to glory. There's no witchcraft to that. There's no hoodoo voodoo to that. You know, I hear people say that Africans called their ancestors. You're wrong. That is what they're saying. They're reverencing where they came from, who they are. They're knowing that Sasha is important and it is finite and it should be cherished. Because once something hits the Zamani, right? Once something has passed from being out of our touch, our involvement, there is no one alive right now who knew Frederick Douglass. There is no one alive right now who could tell you that they sat firsthand and talked to him. The only thing that we have from a Frederick Douglass, a Harriet Tubman, is whatever was left, whatever was written. And we have to decipher the meaning. And sometimes we get that deciphering wrong. Good to see you, Tony Briscoe. Thank you for joining us, my brother. And thank you for that. Pastor Razor, good to see you. Good to see you. My wife, my sweetheart, thank you. It's a blessing to have elderly in our family. They are a wealth of, they are, and they should be something that we cherish and listen to, that we give time to. Because if we do not do that, we run into what we're seeing right now: revision, lies. And we're falling into the trap of, I think I said it a couple of weeks ago, folklore, myth. No one wanting to really investigate, to challenge, to learn. And when we are given validated, sourced history, a lot of us don't know how to interpret it. And we can't parse between the fictional and the nonfiction, the factual, right, and the fallacy. And I'm seeing that more and more. It's just happening so often. I saw a young lady the other day. She posted a thing online. I think I answered it on Facebook. And I know because I got some responses back from people going, man, you went real deep with this, man. You didn't have to go so deep. You went real deep with this. And I was like, wait a minute. What you're not understanding is that every time I come across something that is illogical or doesn't make sense or doesn't have an accurate historical meaning or background, or I have to challenge that. And you have to challenge that. What the young lady said had parts of the truth. What she wrote was, I can't believe that white people made the phrase tall, dark, and handsome to refer to other white people. And I got a decent amount of people online right now, and I thank you all for being here. Can anybody tell me where that term tall, dark, and handsome comes from? As I read Pastor Ray's thing, please feel free to put something in here. Where's the first time you may have ever heard that term? Where do you think it comes from? Pastor Razor. Sometimes what we have from them has been deliberately misconstrued. So getting this history from the source ensures accuracy. My stepfather used to tell us stories about his early childhood and conflicted with what our history books recorded. He was in his 70s in the 1970s. Amen. That is absolutely correct, because that is where we're going to get our firsthand primary sourced information from people who actually lived through it, who can tell you, yeah, they may tell you this, but this is the reality. This is really what happened. You know, there's an old story about Babe Ruth, that he pointed out to a field and he hit a ball out for a boy that was in the hospital. And the people bought into that myth, that folklore, because they liked Babe Ruth. But the reality of it was that the people that were there, no, man, he was really just trying to cover his eyes to see what, who was out there. And then he hit the ball. But it went to say he pointed where he was going to go. That's how myths and things change. And some of them are inconsequential, and some of them are very important for us not to misunderstand. How can we get information on our family history when most of them were dead before? And see, that is a great question, Pastor Sarton. You know, my wife's brother asked me to do something, do a show talking about how to go and trace information from your family in the best way you can. Dr. Henry Louis Gates has a show called Finding Your Roots, where he goes and he sits down with people, right? And so the problem with it is this: once we let something get so far outside of out of our family, our Sasha, our current people, then myths and folklore start to happen. But the one good thing about the last century is we have documentation for everything. The one good thing about the 1800s is we have documentation almost for everything too. The problem only in the 1800s is that we often don't have names. So what happens is because blacks were property, you had to put things down to suggest what you owned. So you have to find a way to link those things. And we do a good job now because we are putting information everywhere for us to be able to find. But now the thing comes down to, how do you vet it? How do you challenge it? How do you make sure that the source is absolutely correct? Getting back to the question that I asked earlier, I always thought it came through a black exploitation movie. Okay, close. Eddie, first time I heard that phrase was in the movie. Tyson, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Good to see you, my brother. I'm happy that you're here. Look, the idea of, hold on, get past the race before I make this. My mother married an older man. He was full of history. I got a lot of information from him and other elders in our family. When I was young, they were careful to share with us because we were experiencing the civil rights riots and marches in real time. And again, there is so much history. I love sitting down with people and getting information and talking to them and vetting it to what history says and realizing where history falls short and then looking at who wrote the history. That's the key too. Who wrote it? I used to say it if was around back then and knew they couldn't fly. Now we know it's still happening. Yeah, it's still happening. It was about white men. There you go, Tyson. It is and it isn't, but you are very close too. So let me tell you where this phrase "tall, dark, and handsome" comes from. Tall, dark, and handsome is an idiom that is not really new. but it does come from film. Many of you were absolutely correct. But it wasn't created necessarily for people. Not really. The tall, dark, and handsome idiom comes from the early days of film, the beginning of film. There was an actor called Rudolph Valentino. Every now and again, you'll still hear, "Oh, you're a Valentino," right? Because Rudolph Valentino was a Southern was of Southern Italian origin. And as a matter of fact, I was going to share this map with the post that I put, and I didn't. So I'm going to share it with you all while I'm on here, while we're talking about this, because it's funny because it's on my desktop, so I can easily share it. Let me share something with you all real quick. Please forgive me. All right, you see this map right here? You see this map? Good to see you, Mike. Thank you for joining us. This map shows you where the Moors, who were black, came in and took over parts of Italy, right? If you look at this, you see all of this area, Sicily and things like that. The Moors came in and they were blacks, and they went over and they basically immersed themselves in Italian and in the culture, even also into parts of Spain. And so what happened was Rudolph Valentino, the actor, he was of Southern Italian origin. Actually, he came from Calabria, right? If you look on the map, you'll see it down there, right? That's where his ancestors came from. And so, but he was a very handsome man, right? But the moguls, the people who ran the studios during that time, they knew that Valentino's ancestors had been Moors. They knew that many actors who came from Italy, that's why a lot of Italians were frowned upon, they knew that they had black in their blood. So when they came up with a phrase, right, that could distinguish certain actors, specifically Valentino, from other white actors, right? Because Valentino made a lot of money over in the Italy cinema, throughout the European world. He also made a lot of money for the studios over here in America. He played it was a movie called The Sheik, where he wore darker makeup. And The Sheik is very important. It's one of his breakout movies, and it's still reverenced by film historians today. And what that movie was about was he played an Arab sheik, right, who seduces a white girl. And throughout the early part of the movie, the audience hates the sheik because he's seen as a dark-skinned rapist that's trying to corrupt this white woman, until halfway through the film, it is revealed that the sheik, even though he's wearing dark skin, he could wipe it off, right? He's actually he was a white boy that was adopted by murderous Arabs. And because of that, now he's seen as a good character that this white woman could be friends with. However, the term tall, dark, and handsome was still used because they wanted you to understand that though they're permissible, they still have Negro blood in them, quadroons. So when the term tall, dark, and handsome came into the public specter and it started happening, the actress Mae West, who loved black people and had many black boyfriends, in her movie, she would say tall, dark, and handsome. And it was one of the reasons why she was actually pushed out of making films, because the censor board didn't want her saying that. They wanted to get away from it, and she wouldn't stop. She wanted to let them know that that idiom is stupid, that these men are beautiful, no matter what their background. But when a young lady posted what she posted, she didn't know that. She didn't know that. And so we have to spend time, like I just did right now. That seems inconsequential, but we can back it up through history. We can back it up looking at this map of the Moors and knowing where they come from. We can back up this history because we can challenge it and go into it and pull it up. This is why it is so important for us to share our history. It is so important for programs like this and other folks to get out here and try to teach history in its proper way. Because if we don't do that, we fall into lies, myths, folklores. It was intended to describe a handsome man. Clark Gable had black in him. It came out recently that the singer, Johnny Cash, they thought he had black in him because of the dark-skinned woman that he married who looked black because she was partially black. But he also had black in him. The truth of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why I call Black history our history, everybody's history, especially in America, is because the amalgam of people coming together in America, the melting pot, as we call it, is real. People of all cultures, backgrounds, secretly and openly having babies together who are multiple different races, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we lie. That's the problem, Pastor Razor. In the past 10 years, I have realized that who wrote the history is virtually important. And as a pastor, I have found that many Black preachers don't want to believe that the recorders of history also manipulated the Bible at various times in history. And some of what we preach today has no biblical foundation, but rather a foundation based on what the recorders told us that certain scriptures leaned. These researchers of history had the power of the pen, so they actually redefined. There you go. I'm going to give you all some homework to look at tonight. Pastor Razor just brought it back to my mind. I want you all to go look, and Teddy, could you type this in the chat for me? I want you all to go look up a man called Archibald Dunning. Archibald Dunning. Take the time this week and go read about Archibald Dunning. Elvis was black. Oh wait, he stole the blackness. Never mind. I just saw that Mariah Carey had a black father. Yes, there's so much of, but what is scary in our society is the marginalization of Black. The marginalization of Black. Because it's almost as if it's cool to say that you have Black relatives, grandparents, or whatever, when it comes down to how it can help you, if it can. Ronda Rousey has a very famous Canadian Black grandfather, the fighter, Ronda Rousey. But it only came out because her mother wanted people to know. She's like, Ronda has a very famous Black grandparent. Ronda never said anything about that. And there are many actors in Hollywood who have Black parents who don't talk about the fact that they have Black parents because that's not a business benefit to them. And that's a problem. That's a problem. We need to know what's going on. There's so many people in history that you would be surprised. You would be surprised had leanings. But we minimize the idea of having Black. Pastor Razor brought up another interesting point here, where he was talking about the way that things were taught. And I want you all, there's a book. I have a book here. It's one of my books that's on my collection too. If you don't have it, get this book by Dr. Claude Anderson. He writes actually really pretty good books. He gives you little pieces of history, and I like that to an extent, and then kind of challenges you to go further. But I remember reading in this book, he talks about the use of Black preachers and ministers. and how when they were getting their religious instruction, to be able to teach to other slaves, they had such passages in it, and I'm going to quote it from his book. The question was, who gave you a master and a mistress? And the preacher who was becoming ordained to teach to these slaves would have to say, God gave them to me. The other question was, who says that you must obey them? God says I must. And then they took parts of the Bible actually out so that the slaves could not have a full understanding of the Bible, because too many parts of the Bible would go against what was being done to them by family, because let's call what this was. A lot of the slave masters were family and owners. And so they had to be very careful, right, of taking all of that out, because they didn't want an uprising. Tina, I don't mind admitting I have white Indian and African culture in my DNA. Many of us do. But if you go back and look a couple of weeks ago, months ago, maybe, and look at my episodes in which I talked about the Maroons, when I talked about the civilized tribes, when I talked about how Africans were already over here, interacting, intermingling, marrying with others over in the Americas. And that the major reason why that we started to be brought over here even more is because the natives were dying. If you go look at Casas and you look back at the time of Columbus and you see how many natives that they killed as the Spanish came over here, as other cultures came over here. But what was interesting was that the darker people who they knew had interacted with blacks, they could live. They could work in the tobacco, in the sugarcane fields. They could survive. They had they didn't succumb to many of the illnesses or diseases that the natives over here succumbed to. And so we act as if the slave trade, the African slave trade, just happened. If you go read history, we act as if it just fell out of the sky and they decided, let's go get black people. They got them because they could survive. They got them because they knew that they could endure. Our ancestors. And they took that intermediate system that they had done with the natives and changed it into what we now see as transatlantic slave trade in history. It was the impetus, it was the beginning, the beginning of it. And that's something that isn't often taught completely in our schools. My opinion, the Black church has neglected the responsibility of teaching our history and heritage. It's the reason our young people gravitate toward the militancy of Islam or Hebrew Israelites. They don't know their identity, and whoever speaks to empower them about this is who they will gravitate toward. Only 27% of young people who grow up in church return. They are not prepared to defend the family from a historical or spiritual heritage lens. That's so much truth in what you said right there, Tony. So much truth in what you said right there. But the reason why the Black church got out of it, stopped doing it, right? If you go read Carter G. Woodson's Miseducation of the Negro, and he gives time to that. I like Dick Gregory because he said it a little bit more clearly. Dick Gregory says that, and I'm not going to use the exact words, that if you sit in filth long enough, you start to become part of that filth. You start to not be able to smell it, to notice it. You are now filthy and with the filth. So whereas you started from coming out of slavery with the idea we have to be empowered, because knowledge At the end of the Civil War, at the freeing of Black people from slavery and bondage, knowledge was seen as a time of jubilee. We can now learn and be a part of society. Yes, I have a copy of the Slave Bible, and it's powerful indictment of the intent and purpose of the records of history during the times of Archibald Dunning. The most prevailing view by the history recorders of that time was that Blacks didn't have souls, therefore we were not human. They recorded history from that perspective. Sir, my library has grown by leaps and bounds since I met you. Amen. And I'm glad that I can help with that. Here's the thing. When people wanted to get around the cognitive dissonance, that's what psychologists and psychiatrists call it, right? When you know something is true, but you find some way to deny it to yourself, and you have to give yourself an excuse, a fallacy, some way to make yourself not pay attention to what is evil and what is wrong. And that dissonance is a huge part of America. They knew that enslavement and bondage was wrong. They knew it biblically that it was wrong. Remember, the people who came over here, majority of the people who came over here from Europe came over here with religious intentions. That's what they said. We came here to teach the savage about God. And in reality, what they did was they found a way to make it so that God didn't apply to you. The native over here was a heathen. The African was a heathen. They were not even human. They are beasts of the field. And as you tell yourself this, now you say, well, I have no reason to listen to these people because they're not people. But I remember having a discussion with a historian a couple of years ago, and I said, sir, he was telling me that. Well, that's how they got away with it. They try to tell themselves. And I said, but let me ask you a question. Just my logical mind working with me. If you tell me that my great ancestors, they weren't human, right? Then why was you sleeping with them? Why was you raping them? Do you go out there and have sex with a horse? Do you go out there and go have sex with a dog? I mean, some do, but do you do it in mass where that's a normal thing? You're lying to yourself. You knew that they were human. You knew more about them than they knew about themselves. But the strength of racism, right? What gives racism its strength is the financial wealth. You can go look at any kind of ethnic cleansing, racism, murder, and you will find at the heart of it is envy, jealousy, and money. The slave trade was the engine that drove America. Without slaves, without our ancestors, for you Black Americans who are over here, there would be no America. People slave from can't see to can't see. And they did it with the hope of one day being free to enjoy everything they were working for. They weren't animals. You don't have babies with animals. They knew it. It was a cognitive dissonance. It was a lie. That's what we try to do. They had religious intentions. Those are intentions. Leopold went on his murderous rampage in the Congo and killed more people than what we. And I don't dissuade the Holocaust, because when I say this, people get mad. Oh, nobody's saying that. But the amount of Black Africans who died under the hands of European power is hugely, largely over the top of what we know that happened in before World War II or during World War II. And we have to understand that. But see, if we're not taught that history, if people in Florida and different states say, we don't want nobody to know this because it hurts the feelings, It's a lie. It's a lie. You know, a couple of months ago, I sat here, and I'm going to bring it up again. I sat here and I created this whole, and I find myself every now and again bringing back up this slideshow. And I created this, and I need to put it on my website. I've been meaning to do it for a while. And it talks about all these men who deceived America. And this is modern. I wanted to make sure that when I did this, this was modern. These ambassadors, these presidents, these people who ran universities, these folks who financed Black colleges, they had a reason for this. And coming out of the Civil War, where they could no longer legally bondage you, they had to find a way to keep the shackles on you. They had to find a way to get you. And they have. And they have, and they still do. Come on now. And allowing them to be, yeah. Breastfeed the babies. You know what's another funny thing to me, Michelle, is that I watch all of these cooks now. I watch so many cooks because my son, he cooks. And there's so many European and white cooks and cooks out here who are in America, and they're doing TikToks and everything, and they're showing everybody how to make all this stuff. And I laugh because I have a memory of looking at history and realizing that even in the South, these so-called Southern cooks, they would get the mamas and the aunties to come in and work for them as maids, and they cooked your meals. They cooked your Southern meals. They are the ones who came up with them recipes. They are the ones who went out there and got them herbs and different things that they found up in there. And they are the ones whose families were a part of Maroons nations and part of the Native Americans who worked together. These are intermingling cultures, tri-cultures who work with each other. We don't talk about how the American indigenous people, the Indians as we call them, worked with the African, helped to get a lot of some of them freed, took them into other places. We don't talk about any of that. And yet, the America is blessed. It is blessed from those very people. We don't talk about the cultures that came into Europe before what we see as modern time and influenced what they ate and what they were doing. Because, see, that history is not important. It's more important for us to talk about what someone in Europe provided. The chefs that you see out here. And then wondrously, right? They somehow find a way to cook the macaroni in a way. And you say, wait a minute, who taught you that? And then if they honest with you. I remember when Paula Deen got called out for calling people the N-word. And got on there and said, I love African Americans. A lot of the cooking I learned was from African Americans. Yeah. And you made millions off of it. But yet you could call the ancestors of those people the N-word. That's why Biblically Black and Blessed and Biblically Black Blessed 2 is so important. I am working on Biblically Black and Blessed 3, The Gentiles Return to God. Shameless plug. No, those are really good books, Pastor Ray's, and people need to go get them. We need to be teaching. Teaching history is important, ladies and gentlemen. If it ain't biblically, culturally, traditionally, if we don't do that, we're going to lose ourselves. My wife was joking with me the other day where she said she saw somebody, I think she said it was Leslie Jones. She went out and asked people during Dr. King's birthday, what do they know about Dr. King? And they said, I have a dream. And she said, Tina said that she said she would get them a whole bunch of money if they could tell her something about Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, right? Other than I have a dream. And they couldn't do it. Because see, I have a dream is almost like thoughts and prayers in social media and in the world. It's just something I say to blow you off. And it's sad because what are we not learning? I have a next Bible that was given to me 30 years ago. I don't use it. I open it and share my wife. It's his commentary misusing the scripture to support white supremacy. I know about that. It took her to this 30 reason God demanded the races remain separate. She was shocked. Yeah, they were teaching that, and some still do. Now, as openly, but they still teach it. They stole from us and are still stealing. We will lose ourselves. Yeah, I thought that was Lizzie Jones. Thanks, Tina. We are finding that there is an attack. There is an attack. And if we don't start to counter this attack, we're going to have problems. You know, there's a quote by a historian, Herbert Butterfield. Yeah, I know. You probably don't know him, but this is a very powerful quote. And what he said is, I do not know if there is any other field of knowledge which suffers so badly as history from the sheer blind repetitions that occur year after year and from book to book. It's a powerful quote because it is true. It is true. People are not recognizing what their kids are being taught. They're not recognizing. I watched a video with my children where a teacher stood up and told the class that whites were under attack. Whites were under attack because they are the Latino, they are the brown skinned people too, and that the Latinos were white just like her. And I was telling someone a couple of years ago, I said, you realize that the United States has now changed. When you go take and fill in for your job, they're now asking you, do you see yourself as Black, African American, non-Latino? And then you can call yourself a white Latino. These are people, the same people who they would sit here and say, we don't want in our country, but they want to claim their numbers. If we don't understand our history, we're going to be lost. When I asked young people a couple of years ago, I asked a young man about the Alamo because he's from Texas. And he had a belt coming to a Navy function, had the Alamo. I said, do you know what the Alamo was about? He was like, oh, yeah, man, that was Texas freedom. And I listened to what he was telling me, and I shook my head for his moments of telling me. And then I reminded him, well, I thought I was reminding him, but I was actually informing him that you are aware that the Alamo, the reason that happened was because white settlers went down in Mexican land. Even though some were allowed, the Mexican government had allowed, I believe it was 40,000 settlers to come down, and almost more than triple of that came down. And they really came down because they wanted to be able to keep their slaves. And the Mexican government had outlawed slavery. And they told them to leave. And they did not want to leave. But that's not taught to us in history. We're told, remember the Alamo. Right? That's what we're told. And that's what they're told. That's what the history is told to our young people. These revisioned historical things that don't really agree with facts. They're loose. There was a psychologist by the name of George Kelly who had a theory called the range of convenience, which could be used to explain they slept with people that referred to as beasts. Yeah, there's truth to that, Teddy. But a lot of it really comes down to many of them knew exactly what they were doing. They knew exactly. When you go read the book, what's the name of that book? The Breeding of black women or American slaves, you will get firsthand quotes from women who lived through that time, who were encouraged to have up to 25 babies, to be a good breeder. That's what they called them. And if I'm a good breeder, masters say he will free me, or he will let me have more privileges if I have more and more babies. And some of them babies was masters. They knew what they were doing. And it takes a very special type of evil to lay down with women, have children with them that look like you, and still keep them enslaved, serving your other children, their brothers and sisters. That's how evil that was. That's how corrupted and twisted that was. I am waging a war right now, to be openly honest with all of you all, on how we teach history. My plans and what I'm doing, we got to do better. We got to do better. We got to know more. We got to lace it, like Pastor Razor said. The biggest lie anybody ever will tell you is that science does not represent God. I'm going to say it again. The biggest lie people will tell you is that science and God do not agree. That is not the truth at all. Very religious men were the ones who first looked up to the stars to find out and question, how did God make something so wondrous? There's nothing wrong with understand that. But if you don't wrap yourself with knowledge and put God in your pursuit of knowledge, because I know very knowledgeable people who are fundamentally wrong in their approach when it comes to faith and the idea of God. Fundamentally wrong. But if they were to understand, years ago, I used to tell people that science tells you that there are things in the universe that cannot be measured, right? It's called the dark matter. When I was a kid in science, they used to tell us that the universe was shrinking. It's in the end, it's going to compact. And then they came back out and said, no, actually the universe is growing. Right? Because the word of God spoke it to being. He spoke things to come of its own kind. People don't even understand scientifically. There is a thing called perturbation. This is your world. This is your planet. Your planet cannot spin on its axis. It cannot move and give you the seasons without the other planets that are in that system and that sun that sits there to shine upon it. And they all revolve around each other in a perfect system. One needs to be there to pull the other so that one doesn't fall out of orbit. And the tug and the pull, the perturbations that happen every second, every minute. That's science. We know it happens. We know the elliptical, the apogee, and the perigee orbit. We know why it happens. We use the science to benefit us. That's how we send satellites out into space. We shoot them at a certain degree because we know that God designed the universe so that the mass of this planet keeps those things in orbit. And they can go so far out, but they're going to get pulled right back because of the perturbation, the pull and the tug. But yet, we'll let people tell us that that's not God. But go read Genesis and read the very beginning of Genesis and understand that God is telling, it's all written there. They weren't scientists. They weren't people with 5, 6 degrees, but they understood. They understood some of it because God let them understand to their level of understanding. And we got to do better. I agree. They knew what they were doing. Charles Carroll alluded to this in his writings. He tried to use quackery science to explain his evil position. Exactly. Because the people who were reading him didn't understand the science. And they don't want them to understand. The best way to keep people under your foot is to keep them ignorant. Evil, no love or concern for not even. There is a lot of truth to what went on in this country and the desire to do evil, because you realistically thought you were doing what everybody told you to do, and you went along with it. So many lies, which create a pull on knowledge of history. That's why we have to spend so much time teaching it and making sure we get on. This is why I get on every Thursday to do this. I do believe that many of them are opening themselves up to that because there's a complete idea that I don't care because it benefits me. Yeah, it is called codependency. Like the gears of a clock. Perfect order. Ladies and gentlemen, I really enjoyed this session. I like when people come on to the session because I think we get more out. We can teach better. I can provide you knowledge, give you things and places to go. Go look up Archibald Dunning. Spend some time looking at some of these people. I am going to try to get this out here, this slide, because I just thought about it. I should have that out there because there's so many of these men and some women who are still, their words are still being used to shackle us even today. And we're starting to see that even in our politics and in our culture. And we're starting to see throughout the country that it's becoming something that people are getting behind. And it's feeding into our kids. Ask your child what they learned in school. Ask your child. You know, Ron DeSantis, I'm going to say this before I get off here tonight. Ron DeSantis had made a comment that he went in and he tried to pull information out of math books. And people were like, wow, wow, wow. And a couple of months ago, me and my son, he's 14 now, we were talking about it. And I said, it's just silly. And he said, no, Daddy, because you have to understand, this is a child. He said, you got to understand, Daddy, that when I read a book, that they are racist in their books. What they'll do is they'll show two drawn out white kids with a teacher leaning on them, and they're playing, and they'll ask a question about Johnny had 2 eggshells and Susie had 4, and they'll ask a question, but the image that they show, then they show a black kid with a basketball, right? But never show the black kid in these books really looking educated. And I said, wow, what does that do to our children's minds? He understood that at his age. You have to challenge and you have to teach. And if you can't, get others who can. Get books and knowledge and have a discussion with your family. Just like you pray at home with your family, talk. Take a 30 minutes to an hour and spend it talking about something that can grow their minds historically. Learn together. Learn together. All right, everybody, that's an hour. Thank you so much. We came on a little bit late, and I do really greatly appreciate everybody that came on. Erudition Network is a labor of love for me to do this every Thursday. I don't see too many, and I say that as a challenge. I don't see too many other historians who get on every week and they talk about history. I don't. And so I make sure, no matter how I feel or what's going on, that I'm going to do that. So until we're going into Black History Month, so I'm going to be on. My plan is to be on almost every day with something during Black History Month. Even if it's not a live session, you're going to see something from us every day, because we want to be able to do that, and we want to be able to inform. So take what we give you, get out there, learn, and try to provide it to those who need it. I do need to do a session about ancestry and how we can go back, because that's a great question by Pastor Sarton, and I've been meaning to do that. Thank you all. It was a good session. I do agree. Yeah, there's not a lot of information that is shared, and that's why we do it. Thank you. Thank you. Blessings to you too, Pastor Sarton. All right, everybody. Until next week, as we go into Black History Month, you all have a blessed and wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you.